Alright, so this LeetCode question is called majority element. It says, given an array of size n, find the majority element. The majority element is the element that appears more than n divided by 2 times. That just means the element that shows up in more than half of the indices of the array. Then it says you may assume that the array is non-empty and the majority element always exists in the array. So example 1, the array is 3, 2, 3, and the output is 3 because it shows up more than half the time in the array. Example 2, the array is 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, and the output is 2 because it shows up 4 out of 7 times in the array. Alright, so as I mentioned before, the majority element is the element that shows up in more than half of the indices of the array. So in this array, we have 3 elements. What's 3 divided by 2? 1.5. So in order to be the majority element, it would have to show up more than 1.5 times. Alright, so the key to solving this is to just loop over every element of the array and keep count of how many times it's shown up. And every time you do that, you just compare it to half. If it's more than half, then we know that's the majority element. So it would look like this. We'll start with the number 3. The number 3 has shown up 1 time. So we'll keep count of it in, let's say, a map. So 3 has shown up 1 time. Is 1 greater than half, which is 1.5? No, it's not. So you move on to the next element, which is 2. 2 has also shown up 1 time. Is 1 greater than 1.5? No. So now you go to the last 3. 3 has now shown up 2 times. Is 2 greater than 1.5? Yes, so we know that 3 is the majority element. Alright, so let's get to the code. What LeetCode has given us is a function called majority element, which accepts an array called nums. So what's the first thing we can do? We know that if an array has, let's say, just 1 element, that's the majority element. So we can say if nums.length equals 1, return the first element in the array, because it's the only element in the array. Next, we'll get a count of how many elements would make up half the array. And we're going to use this later on to just check whether the element we're on has appeared more than half the time. So let half equal nums.length divided by 2. Okay, and like we mentioned before, we're going to keep count of each element in a map. So let element count equal a new map. We can represent it like this. Right now it's empty. And let's just add half. Half in this case would be 1.5. So if the element appears more than 1.5 times, we know that that's the majority element. Alright, so now let's loop over the array. So for let num of nums. Now what do? We're going to check to see if the element that we're on is in the map yet. So we'll say if element count doesn't have the num. So what does that mean? If the element we're on does not appear in the map, we'll just add it to the map with a count of 1. So element count dot set num, which is the num we're on, and count being 1. So right now, it looks like this. The number 3 appears 1 time. At this stage, what do we need to do? We've added it to the map already. Now we have to check whether this element has appeared more than half the time. So we'll say if the element count dot get num, which would get us the count of that number. So if it's greater than half, then we just return that num. That's not the case yet, but it's good to have that if statement there. So what happens now? We need to move to the next number, the number 2. So again, it goes into the if statement and says, if it doesn't have this number, add it to the map with a count of 1, which we'll do here. Number 2 has a count of 1. Goes into the next if statement. Has the number 2 shown up more than half the time? No, because its count of 1 is not greater than half, which is 1.5. All right, so now we're at the next element. So remember that first if statement is if this is the first time we've seen that element. It's not. So now we need an else statement. So else, what we have to do is set its count to 1 more than what its count was before. So element count dot set, what are we setting? We're setting the number, and now we need the count. So how do we do this? The way to increment its count is to retrieve its last count and add 1 to that. So we'll do that by saying element count dot get num, which gives us its old count, and we add 1 to that. So now its count in the map is the number 2. So now it goes into the if statement below. It says, if the count is greater than half. The count right now is the number 2, so it is greater than half. So in that case, it's going to return num, which is the number 3. But let's say none of them were the majority element. It would have looped over all of these, checked if they were greater than half, and none of them would have met that criteria. So at the end, we would just return -1. All right, let's see how we did. Looks good. Submit it. All right, so our solution was faster than about 46% of JavaScript submissions. As usual, the code and written description are linked down below. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.